If you or someone you love has diabetes, you'll be blessed by our YouTube channel called Beat Diabetes. Benedicta and I conduct blood sugar tests on ourselves. I interview guests that have seen dramatic victory over diabetes. I share reviews of books and documentaries about lowering blood sugar. And I give talks about the keys to getting your A1C down in a hurry. I'm convinced that by God's grace, you can find victory in your struggle with diabetes. Go to YouTube and in their search engine, type in the words Beat Diabetes, Dennis Pollock. Looking at the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, longest sermon of Jesus that we have recorded. And it's all about how we are to live if we're going to follow him. He doesn't say a word about, well, you need to pray the sinner's prayer, ask me into your heart, and you'll be saved. Not that you can't get saved that way, but that's not what that's not his main thought. He is saying, here is how you live. He starts out with what we call the Beatitudes. Who's blessed? Well, that's a good question. Who is blessed in this life? We might look at the billionaires and say, well, they're the blessed ones. But he says, blessed are the poor in spirit. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn. They shall be comforted. That is, you mourn for the sake of Christ. You mourn for the fact that you're persecuted for Christ's sake. Blessed are the meek, they'll inherit the earth. So he gives all these blessed. He tells who is blessed and by implication who is not. He says you're the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. Let your light so shine before men. And he just gives all these ideas. He tells us you must forgive your enemies. And he says you need to agree with your adversaries, and if you're going to the judge, try to make peace with them. In other words, this is how my people are supposed to live. Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount. Here is how you live. And then at the end, he says, whoever hears my sayings and does them will be like someone who built their house on a rock. On a firm foundation, in other words. And the rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on the house, and it didn't fall. It was founded on the rock. So you hear these words, and when he says these words, he's talking about what he's just been preaching, this Sermon on the Mount. And he says if you do them, he doesn't say if you just agree mentally that, yeah, they're good words. He says you do them. You live by these things I'm telling you. Then you'll be like a house built on a rock. Now, the opposite, he says, is those who hear and don't do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain descended, the floods came, the winds blew in and beat on that house, and it fell. Well, we have a word for that, and the word is collapse. Your life collapses. Everything falls apart on you. Why? You heard, but you didn't do it. You didn't put it into practice. And yet, amazingly, we have some people who think of themselves as Christians who tell us just ignore the Sermon on the Mount. Nowhere in this sermon is how to get saved. He'll tell us that later. He'll say in John 3:16, whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. So he's telling us how you get saved. And he's telling us later on, he tells Mary, and because it's in the Bible, he's telling all of us, he who believes in me, or she, will live forever. So it's not that Jesus ignores the idea of faith. But right here, in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the issue is not how you get saved. And the truth is, if I was wanting to lead people to Christ, I would not pull out Matthew 5, 6, and 7 and say, well, here is how you get saved. I'd tell them, put your faith in Jesus. But I might refer to Matthew 5, 6, and 7 and say, and by the way, when you give your life to Christ, here is how he expects you to live. You think that's okay to tell people who are prospective Christians? They're thinking about becoming a Christian. You're talking to them about giving their life to Jesus. You think it's okay to tell them, and here is how Christ wants his people to live once you do get saved? What do you think?
It's really great to tell them or to preach to them or discuss it, without table talk or preaching from the pulpit. Is really good to tell them or to let them know what is up, because Jesus, who spoke it out, teaching the disciples and, speaking into their lives and letting them know that this is available is like wanting us to, preach it, and he let the disciples preach it and, tell people. It's good to know because heaven is a kingdom, and there are kingdom rules, and Jesus is like giving us a little bit of it, like there are rules and regulations. You start from here, to live it. And if the Bible made it clear that we are, living and ruling with Christ right here, what we're living, and then this is like when we live here, we're transitioning where he is, and then it's like we have to, mature in things of God from here. And at the same time, sometimes I use family to give examples, or a country. There's like, this country got their rules and regulation, and then you come to a place where, they have already laid down, this is how you live here, and then you go breaking all the laws. It's like, okay, well, you are not surely qualified to be here. Mm-hmm.
You can see condensed video versions of my devotional studies on YouTube. The graphics and the scripture verses displayed on the screen make these video devos an experience that will bless, uplift, and instruct you. Go to the YouTube website and type in my name, Dennis Pollock, and you'll quickly find our YouTube channel. Well, one expression that I sometimes use to describe the Sermon on the Mount and other exhortations about how Christians are supposed to live is job description. Mm-hmm. If you get hired at a job, there's no employer that's just going to, say, okay, you start work on Monday and you can figure out what you have to do and what you should do. No, the employer will sit down. Some cases, it's a very official sort of a job description where they've got, 20 printed sheets they go over line by line, paragraph by paragraph, and here's what you do, and here's what you must not do, and so forth. Other cases, they may just sit down and for half an hour say, well, what we want you to do is this. If you get hired at a local McDonald's restaurant, they're probably not going to give you 20 sheets of paper about everything that's involved. If you get hired at a restaurant as a dishwasher, you don't need that long of a job description, but still, you got to have something. You
don't go and break when those, plates are piled up for you to wash.
Yeah, there you go. You can't break the dishes. So this Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount, is essentially a job description for the Christian. This is how it works. Again, some people, they don't like it that Jesus was strict. They don't like it that he even tells people what they're supposed to do. Their whole idea is, well, we're just supposed to believe by faith, and then, whatever we do or don't do doesn't hardly matter. But actually, their big hero, the hyper grace folks I'm talking about, their big hero is Paul, because and in fact, they love Paul so much, they sometimes say, you should listen to Paul and ignore Jesus. They won't put it in those words, but that's essentially what they're saying. Paul gives you the real gospel. Jesus does not. Never mind the fact that he said God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. But anyway, Paul is their hero. But
Paul is following Christ,
Yeah, Paul said, follow me, for I follow, just as I follow Christ. But if you read the writings of Paul, he had all kinds of things to say about how Christians are supposed to live. I mean, he didn't just say, get saved by faith, get saved by faith, get saved by faith. You read Romans, get saved by faith. You read Galatians, get saved by faith. Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, get saved by faith. That's not all he says. He has all kinds of exhortations and commands about how Christians are to live. And he tells us, forgive each other, be gentle, be kind, be loving. And in 1 Corinthians 13, he tells us in detail what love involves. And he says, accept one another, love one another, forgive one another. And so the idea that there is no such thing as a lifestyle for the Christian is absolute folly. Paul gives it in his own way. Jesus gives it in his way, which is the ultimate way, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and other places in the Scripture, where he's basically telling us, you want to work in my company, you want to be a part of my family, here's how I'll expect you to live. And I firmly believe that when we encourage others to give their life to Christ, there's nothing wrong with, and in fact we should, in some, at least small manner, let them know here's what will be expected of you as a believer. You know, if somebody comes up and says, well, I'm a professional thief. I rob houses for a living. That's how I make my money. That's my career. I'm a house robber. I'm a burglar. And, they say, I want to pray with you to ask Jesus into my heart so I don't go to hell. But I can still keep my job, right? I can still keep my career as a burglar, as a thief.
The answer would be no. You can't keep that job anymore. Get another job.
Right. The answer would be no. And that would certainly be my answer. I say, no, of course not. When you give your life to Christ, you call him Lord and he's your boss and he says you don't steal anymore. Even Paul said that. He said, let him who steals steal no longer, but get a job and work with his hands. So the New Testament is filled with exhortation. A lot of times we talk about, well, the Old Testament was law, the New Testament is grace. That's true. But don't suppose that under the New Testament there are no rules. There are no exhortations about how you live. It's loaded with them. Every epistle of Paul is loaded with commands about how the believers to live. Every chapter in the Gospels of Jesus is loaded with them. So God has a morality for his people. They're to live morally. They are to be sexually pure. They are to refuse to steal any longer. They are not to lie. They are not to covet and commit adultery and all these things. God has a morality. And if you say, I want the salvation, I don't want the morality, I'm still going to go right on living as I always did, lie, steal, fornicate, cheat, and so forth. But I want to go to heaven, so I'm going to pray the magic prayer, the sinner's prayer, and that'll get me to heaven. But I sure don't intend to ever stop doing what I'm doing. That's no salvation, and that's what James means when he says, faith without any kind of corresponding works, without any kind of life change, without any kind of morality. It's just naked faith. I'm still going to live for the devil. I'm still going to live like the devil. That, says James, is dead faith. Faith without works, faith without godliness, faith without the desire to live righteously is dead. And basically what he's saying is it's not real faith at all. Of course, we'll make mistakes. Of course, we'll need forgiveness here and there. But the idea that I will just go right on sinning like I always have is folly.